Welcome to Behind the Muscle podcast. Today's guest is an online prep coach. Today's guest is Cameron Cheek. Cameron, welcome to the podcast, my man.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, for sure, dude. So I'm really excited to chop it up with you. It's been a minute since I've had a coach on here, and I'm excited just to kind of get into your backstory and glean some of your experiences in terms of coaching for myself and the listeners. So, Cam, the first question I have for you is, who are a few of your favorite bodybuilders of all time?
So I knew this question was going to come up, and I was like, man, should I look into who I want to say for this? But the real truth is, I just turned 24. I got into bodybuilding and knew what it was when I think I was 18 or 19. So anytime people are like, oh, who inspired you, who this and that, I think, Jay Cutler was done competing by the time I found out what bodybuilding was. I think the year that I found out what the sport was the year that Sean Roden won the Olympia. So, when I look back and think like, oh, who are like the old school bodybuilders and like my favorite bodybuilders of all time, I really don't have any. Kind of my favorite bodybuilders are those that, are either my athletes or friends I'm surrounded by, that are just really great role models and have kind of taught me as an athlete as well, what it means to be a bodybuilder, and have just been good role models to me. So, I don't know if you've had anybody answer the question like this before, but, I don't really have per se any favorite, old school bodybuilders. All of my favorite ones would either be, my own athletes or maybe some of my fellow friends that I'm surrounded by that do a really good job carrying themselves as athletes within the sport.
Perfect, man. I love that. All right. So you kind of already mentioned, I guess, kind of when you came across bodybuilding around 18. Now, the second question is, at what age did you start lifting weights? And then why did you start lifting weights at that age? So was it 18 or was it before that when you actually started lifting weights as opposed to maybe being exposed to bodybuilding for the first time?
Sure. So I grew up always playing sports. My mom and dad both were collegiate athletes. My dad played college basketball. My mom ran track and cross country in college as well. So I grew up in a household where, we were always surrounded by it. My brother he played high level soccer up until the high school level, but I think he played for like Olympic development teams, stuff like that. And I grew up, I played basketball, in like elementary school. Didn't really like it as much. I had fun playing around like street ball and just pick up games with friends, but organized basketball was not, where I found my passion and where I found within my own success for athletics growing up. I got into playing football, and around, I'd say probably seventh, eighth grade. So maybe I was 11, 12. That's really when I started lifting weights. Now lifting as in trying to actually get something done versus just doing it because we had to, that, is a little bit different. But, I was always in the weight room from about, eighth grade. Yeah. Seventh, eighth grade, around then. But in terms of actually lifting with a purpose, and intent rather than just because we had to, that really started my senior year. When I was done playing football, I was an offensive lineman in high school, and at my heaviest, I got up to 270 pounds. I was a big kid, and I'm around 215 to 220 right now for reference. So, and two totally different weights as well. But, once I got done playing football, I was like, I want to get this weight off of me. Like in high school, I had to keep it. I remember trying to lose weight, and my coaches were like, no, you're going to get thrown around if you start losing weight. And so once I got done with that, that's where I was just like, I'm done with football. Like I don't want to be that big kid anymore, So around 17, 18 was when I would say I truly started lifting because I wanted to.
Perfect. All right. So you kind of mentioned your parents already. You mentioned playing sports growing up. Just talk a little bit more, if you don't mind, Cam, about that childhood. So, talk maybe a little bit more about sports and their influence on you as a young person. Maybe talk a little bit more about your parents and how they influenced you and what your home environment was like. Talk about academic, school. Just paint that picture for us a little bit about your childhood, those earlier years outside of what you've already mentioned, up to high school, and then we'll kind of transition from there.
Sure. Like I said, my parents both playing collegiate sports. Athletics were just something that, I don't remember looking back at a point in my childhood where, ESPN being on the TV, like, talking about sports, whether it be, my mom throughout the summer, like getting up and going running and asking me to go with her, or, they weren't really big into lifting weights. My dad playing basketball, I always remember him telling me, back in the day, they'd be scared that if they lifted too much, it'd mess up their shooting. And so there was never a ton of weightlifting. They actually did get me, I guess the first time I started some kind of just resistance training was probably around maybe the 4th or 5th grade. And they got into it, it was super unique, but the way that the strength carried over to the field, it was like Russian kettlebell training. So I was never picking up any kind of barbell until high school, but we were doing a bunch of like kettlebell swings, like get up, snatches, cleans. And I was never really strong with like a barbell. But the things that I could do with the kettlebell and the explosiveness really carried over towards the field. So that was something that, my parents influenced me with and just kind of got me around. That was something that they did too. We would do like different classes and stuff like that. And, being in like the 4th or 5th grade, it was just something fun to do. It was something where my parents always kept, I would say, an equal balance between academics and athletics, but they held a high standard for both of them. So when it came to school, I finished with, I think, like a 3.5 in high school. Academics were always something that I was, I guess you could say, good at earlier on. It kind of got more boring as I got through high school because I did get fully immersed in just the athletics. And, I played on a really, really good high school football team. We went like 53-4 over my 4 years. My quarterback was Trevor Lawrence, if you're familiar with him. So that was a lot of fun. My brother, like I said, he played high level soccer, especially early on, and just was really, really good at it. I remember having days where my parents would be like, they were always close with my coaches too. Like our coaches were really, really good with just being good role models and leaders in our lives. And, I would probably be more scared to get in trouble and my coaches find out about it rather than my parents find out about it. But I think, my parents had a good influence and just their support, but I had a really good influence by the coaches that were guiding me throughout my athletics. Some of my football coaches that I had in high school, just the life lessons that were taught throughout all of that were, I see it even through athletes that I coach. If I find out like, oh, like you played college sports or you played, football, baseball, whatever it might have been for like 8 years, I'm like, okay, you've probably got some good character traits that have been instilled in you through that. And you can see it coaching athletes that have grown up with an athletic background, or maybe, they're ex-military, like those things just translate over. And, yeah, I think that might have kind of answered the question there a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Now I'm going to kind of pull out a few things from what you shared. I want to go back to what you said kind of in the beginning questions. At one point, you said you weighed like 260, 270 pounds. You were an offensive lineman. Talk about, were you always a big kid? Because, that's a lot of weight to be carrying around. And now you're a prep coach, a bodybuilding coach. So that's kind of like, that's an interesting, I guess, side of your story from my perspective. So talk about that. Talk about, did you enjoy being an offensive lineman? Were you always big? Did you kind of grow into that weight? Why did you play offensive line? And then why don't you talk about the transformation of losing all that weight to kind of where you're at today? Did bodybuilding kind of tie into that? Once you get done answering that, I've got another question for you about your childhood, and then we'll move on.
Sure. So yeah, I would say I always grew up like just a bigger kid, like on the heavier side. Like, and my brother was the complete opposite. He'd be the type where, he could eat 10 Oreos and lose a pound, and I eat two and gain five, and that was just always kind of how it was. I don't really remember a time where, I was like just that skin and bones kid growing up. And so it was something where, I got into football early on. I started playing in the fourth grade. And at that point throughout the rec department, to carry the ball, you had to be under a certain weight limit. And so I remember, it'd come around July, August time where you'd go through just, I guess, I don't remember the name for it, but I guess it'd be almost like training camp where they get all the kids together and then they kind of make a little draft from that. And I'd always be the kid where they put like the red stripe on your helmet of tape on the back, like, oh, no, he can't carry the ball. And so that's where I kind of started out playing offensive line. I got into, probably around the fifth, sixth grade. That's when I really started watching, just guys in the NFL. And there was something about, I was like, man, I really want to play tight end. Like, there's still a bigger guy, but like if I can lose a little bit of weight, go out, run some routes and catch some passes. I really loved watching guys like Tony Gonzalez, Dallas Clark, and just seeing some of those guys. And I remember there was one summer where every single day at like 7 a.m., I'd get up and run like a mile or 2 miles. And that whole summer I worked just to lose weight. And I think I ended up losing like 15, 20 pounds, which for like, a sixth grader, like that's kind of a big deal just to get up and do something like that. And I ended up making weight to play tight end for a little bit of time. And so that was one year I did that. And I think it was just something where I didn't maintain keeping that weight down. Just didn't really know how to. I just kind of went about living my life still and just always kind of resorted back to being like a heavier kid. And then by the time I was probably a freshman, I think I was probably around like 220, 230 pounds. And then my junior year, I always had a really bad problem with just rolling my ankles. And something happened where I fractured a bone in my ankle and I got put in a cast. And I think I was out for maybe like 3 months or something like that. And over that time, just I couldn't do anything. And that's where I think I went from around maybe like 230 to like 260-ish. And that's when I got at my heaviest. And it was just something too, where back then, like now, like I know exactly what I'm weighing, like super on top of just paying attention to that. But back then it's like, how often do you step on a scale as a kid, especially being a guy that plays football, like you don't care, and it was something you just I didn't really see happen. And so there was that. And did you want me to go ahead and get into me actually losing the weight, or did you want to hold that
Yeah,
up?
why don't you just go ahead? Let's just go there, and then we can always take a step back.
Yeah. So, like I said, I ended up, we had a really good team my 4 years there. We won the state championship my senior year. And at that point, I had a couple scholarships to play at some D2 schools, but I was really kind of burned out of it. And I knew at that point, I was like, man, if I'm burned out at high school, like they're going to eat me alive in college. And I was like, I'd rather just focus on the academics and kind of just set myself up for later down the road. I'm not going to the NFL. And so I was just like, you know what, like I'm going to lose all this weight. And I did it in the most unhealthy way possible too, where I just did not eat much, like at all. I'd go to the gym. I think I'd wake up, I had my spring semester, my last semester of high school, but I would get up at like 5 a.m, go work out before school. I think I'd have a protein shake afterwards, wouldn't even eat before I would go to the gym. At lunch, I don't know, I'd have some fruit. After school, I would go back to the gym, and then I would have like what my mom made for dinner, which was like healthier. And that was basically all I would eat. And I remember from that like January-ish until around like maybe July, August of the next that following year. Man, I think I lost around like 70 or 80 pounds within like a 6 or 7 month time frame. I ended up getting, because I needed something to do that was like some kind of goal to chase. I ended up like dabbling and getting into boxing some that summer too. And that was, I mean, that just melted me away. That was rough. But yeah, that was kind of like my journey of just, losing weight. It was almost something where it's funny. I still remember this, but throughout that process, I remember I would watch TV shows of like people who would get stranded on islands and stuff. And they would be like, oh, over this like 21-day adventure, like they lost 32 pounds, like this and that. And I was like, these people that get stranded on these islands, they just don't eat anything. They lose like 30 pounds. I'll just do the same thing. And I mean, it worked, but it wasn't, a great way of going about it. But yeah, that was kind of my little journey of losing that weight.
All right, man. Very, very interesting. Now, the thing that I want to kind of bring up that you kind of just mentioned in passing is you said, you guys had a great football team. You won the state championship your senior year, which that's really cool. But your quarterback was Trevor Lawrence,
Yeah.
number one pick in the NFL draft. I think, what was it, 2 years ago now for the Jaguars. Obviously had an amazing career in college for Clemson. I mean, he had to have had some sort of influence on you and your team. I mean, were you guys close? Just talk about that a little bit, because it's not every day that we have somebody on here that, has a NFL number one pick as a teammate in high school. So just talk about that, because from afar, he seems like he's an individual. He's a man, a young man that has his head on straight. I know his faith is very important to him. What type of influence did he have on you, on your football team? Just talk about him for a minute, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So I was a senior when he was a sophomore. So I was 2 years older than him. And I was the center. So I would say, we were pretty close. Yeah, he put his hands between my legs between some plays. But Trevor was a really cool dude. He was somebody that if I had to define what being humble is, Trevor Lawrence writes that definition through and through. He's the type of guy where if you back in high school, like if you didn't bring up football or talking about football, he was just talking about other things. He wasn't never talked about himself. And just was like, you wouldn't think that it was Trevor Lawrence that you were just sitting down talking to. You just think it was anybody else. But the way that he also carried himself too, it's tough to say, did he influence me because I was older than him? And I could still tell that he was young and he would have his like almost timid moments until we really started lighting it up towards the end of that season. But you could still tell that he was just like a shy younger quarterback trying to find his role in things. I mean, he didn't play like it really, but just knowing him, like it still was there. I would just say that how I felt being a lineman, and just one, I'm not watching what's going on behind me. There was almost just like some safety blanket and like reassurance with him back there, that the job was going to get done. But the way that he carried himself and was just super positive and uplifting, it almost just, that set a foundation for our offense and how everything was ran there. And just, I mean, even there would be times like I remember the first play of the state championship, and like I never did this ever. I just rolled the ball back there on the ground, like just completely blew it on the first play of the game. And I didn't even know what happened. I remember going back there and talking to him. I was like, yo, what just happened? Like, did you get sacked? And he was like, no, you totally rolled it down back there. He was like, but it's all good. You know what you're doing. Don't worry about it. It was super cool playing with him. He was a really good guy. It's somebody that, his position that he was in and his gift that he has, it could have been in the wrong hands of somebody and just completely, it would have been a guy that nobody could stand, but he was the type of person that everybody loved. And he kind of rose to the occasion when needed and brought everybody else up that was around him.
Very cool, man. I appreciate you touching on that. All right.
Sure.
So, you're only 24 years old. You mentioned earlier, which, man, that's crazy. We're there's a 10-year gap between your age and my age, but so there hasn't been a whole lot after high school. But if you don't mind, Cam, just talk about once you graduated. First of all, what were you thinking about you wanted to be kind of when you grew up or once you graduated? Like, did you have some plans of like maybe going off to school to be a doctor or being this or being that? If so, what were those plans? And then once you graduated, how did life kind of unfold for you? You mentioned kind of being exposed to bodybuilding around 18. So why don't you kind of just start tying all that together for us?
Sure. So yeah, this is where it gets interesting. So back in high school, probably freshman, sophomore year, I was totally like, okay, maybe I can still grow a couple inches. Maybe I'll have a shot at playing like D1 football, maybe NFL, whatever. And so first 2 years of high school, I didn't think about doing anything else other than just playing football. And as it got closer towards me graduating, that's where I was kind of like, I really don't want to do this, and I'm done growing. And so I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to help people. And I took a biology class my senior year of high school and just really loved like anatomy, the body, and just how everything worked. And so my next thought that I had was, okay, I really want to be, a dad, a husband one day. I want to be able to take care of a family. I want to be able to set them up and make sure that they're taken care of. And so I was like, okay, medical field, I can help people, usually there's good money there. It sounds like something that's interesting because it has to deal with the human body. I was like, we're going for anesthesia. So I was like, I want to try and be an anesthesiologist. And so I graduated high school and started going to a school called Kennesaw State University in Kennesaw, Georgia. And I was going into biology pre-med. And that's where college, the first couple semesters I was in, like I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a different change of pace from high school. It was way more independent. I feel like like nobody really cared what you did. It's only about what you do that matters at that point. And so I really enjoyed the change of pace there. I lived at home and just commuted back and forth about 30 minutes. And then where things started to get interesting is I was dating somebody, and within the first, I don't know, it had to have been the first 2 months of us dating, I found out she was pregnant. And from there, it was like, okay, what am I going to do? And for college, I was still planning on going, but my parents ended up separating my senior year of high school, and some of the tax stuff, I don't know, it messed up where the loan or scholarship that I had didn't transfer over, and they wanted me to pay out of pocket like that day, and I just didn't have it. And so they pulled me out of school, and I had to forfeit those credits in that semester. And then that's when I had found out that, I was going to be a father at 19. And at that point, I pulled out of school and was just like, okay, like, you know what, right now, I got to figure out how to get, me and his mother into our own house and not living with our parents anymore, get him taken care of. And so that's when, I was like, okay, I just lost all this weight. Like, I'm going to get into personal training. I've got my own self as a testimony to kind of back that up. And so at that point, that's when I kind of started personal training. There were some conflicts between me and my son's mother, and we ended up separating. Actually, we got a divorce, so I was married too. So we ended up separating there. And at that point, I remember I was personal training. I was doing okay there, but I just didn't know what I was going to do at that point. And I remember, I moved back in living with my mother, and she was like, oh, I just got engaged. I'm moving in with my fiance. Like, there's nowhere for you to stay. Like, you got to be out by here. And I'm like, Jesus, like I have no idea where I'm going to live. And I went from being a kid that always had good grades, I was a captain on the sports team, to like this happening. And I was like, what is going on with my life? And I remember the day before I was supposed to move out, I had somebody who taught me a good bit, kind of coming into coaching and things. I put something up on my story like, hey, is anybody looking for a roommate, this and that? And I really didn't have money at the time. Like, my child support bill was high. And I remember him, just responding and being like, yeah, you don't really know me, but I coached one of your friends, somebody that was our roommate just packed up and left, and like they already paid for this month's rent. So if you need somewhere to crash for like a month, like you can come here. And I was like, wow, thank God. Um, and so I moved in with him. His name was Paul. And he, I believe, was getting his master's degree in exercise science. I could be wrong. It's that might be it, but there were a lot of things too where at the time I was personal training, just kind of helping some of my friends with just weight loss stuff. A couple of the linemen that I played with were like, yo, like help me out here. And so I was helping them and really just trying, I was doing a lot, some work for free too, just to try and get testimonies to put out. And he was able to help me a little bit and steer me in the right directions with like, okay, who to learn from, who is putting out good information and who is just kind of spitting out dirt just to spit something out. And he was able to help me there. And, then I remember I started just reading and listening a lot to the first group of people I listened to a lot of their podcasts was 3DMJ. If you've ever heard of them, like Alberto Nunez, Eric Helms. And they did a ton of just Q&As and stuff that I learned an absolute lot from. And I remember picking up a lot of that, and I was like, it'd be fun to work with like real athletes one day. Like, working with general population is super gratifying and it's really awesome. But growing up from a sports background, I still need that competitive little bit of target to have. And I remember there was this one kid named Jeremy Sayers, and he was in a contest prep for a show. And I think I was 20 or 21 at the time. And that was my first year I got into coaching. So this was 2019. And he might have been like 12 weeks out, and he was coaching himself. And I remember just being like, hey, like, what all are you doing? Like, I'm interested. And he told me, and I was like, look, I've never put anybody into a show before. There's plenty of great coaches out there, way better than me. And I said, but I can look at what you're doing, and I can tell you that I at least can make you better than what you're doing right now. I was like, I won't charge you anything, just, if you want me to help, I would love to, and just prep you for the show. And from there, we did that show. He won the overall. I had someone else that had recommended a couple people to me. And I think the first 5 people I put on stage when I was 20 years old, 21, it was like an overall winner. Second person I put on stage got their pro card. The third show was an overall winner. And then the fourth show was another pro card. And it was just out the gate, just pretty nuts.
Okay, so that is very interesting. Now I want to ask you, Cam, like, in that period before, somebody said, hey, one of our roommates paid for their space in our house or whatever, but they took off, you can move in here. When you were kind of in that limbo of, got the divorce, you got your son, your mom's like, hey, I'm getting remarried, you're gonna have to move out. Like during that time period, and you kind of mentioned that's like, man, you kind of had a pretty stable upbringing and everything was pretty good, and an athlete and everything, kind of went the way you wanted it. And then at one point, it wasn't going the way maybe you wanted it or thought. How did you kind of mentally deal with that? How did you kind of work through that? Because obviously, life ebbs and flows. There's a lot of ups, there's a lot of downs. You're going to have a lot of downs still ahead. I'm going to have a lot of downs still ahead, and a lot of ups for both of us as well. But somebody that's watching this or listening to this, maybe they're closer to your age than my age, and maybe they're in that place where they're struggling and they're trying to figure things out. How did you, again, mentally work through that and kind of pick yourself up and move forward? Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely does. And I'll probably be a little bit more just real and raw here, just because I like that perspective that you had in case anyone's in my shoes, because I didn't want to come off as like some kind of sob story through it all, or like, oh, I had to go through this and that. But to be truthful, it was really tough. And I'm trying not to like get emotional through it, but I mean, it was really tough, man. There was a point like where that first year that I kind of got into it was the first year I tried to get into coaching, but like wasn't putting people on stage basically. It was the year that my son was born. I went through that divorce. I lived in 7 different places that year, and just, I remember I was working at 3 different places at one time, just trying. I was working at a gym, a GNC, and I was going to the back in between customers at GNC, like trying to work on some of like the online coaching for some of my people. There was a point where I'd moved in with that roommate I was telling you about, and I didn't know how I was going to pay rent the next month, so I had to sell my dog to pay rent. Um, it was tough. Looking back, it's some of it's kind of like a blur because it almost doesn't feel real in a sense. And it was almost like a traumatic experience because I kind of felt alone a little bit. I don't want to blame, my mom or anything like that for anything, because, she was chasing her own happiness and I was technically a man at that point. I had to figure it out. But there was a point too where I almost kind of felt like, the only person that's got my back really is me. And, I just had to make sure to take care of myself at that point so that I could become, a father that can take care of his son. And thankfully, like, him and I have a great relationship. But, I kind of just took it day by day and week by week at that point. A lot of people will say like, oh, you don't want to live paycheck to paycheck. But, at that point, when you're in that place in life, it's like, you're happy to be able to get to a point where you can live paycheck to paycheck and just make it to the next month. And so that's where, I found a lot of, just gratitude and the opportunity that athletes would bring me. And I realized that's where I just found a lot of care and a place in my heart for athletes that I do get to work with, because there I was, some 20, 21-year-old, where I was having, guys and girls like in their late 20s or whatever the case, like, come in and hire me. And I'm like, you very well could hire someone else who has been doing this and is much older, and would just be super grateful for the opportunity, because I mean, I would probably be skeptical hiring a 20 or 21-year-old coach, And so it was because of them that I was able to, pay my child support, eat, have somewhere to sleep and live. So for anybody else out there in that same situation, like, there's no like real answer as to what to do. You just do it. And, it's a sink or swim situation, and you refuse to sink. There's no other option. You have to swim.
Right, right. Now, before we kind of dig deeper into coaching, did you or have you ever competed like yourself? Or talk about, and then maybe just talk about like, what do you do for like your own training? Talk about when you kind of first got introduced to bodybuilding. You said it was 18. Just talk a little bit about that on the personal side. And then I want to get back into the coaching side of things.
So throughout that year, I was just talking about, I also prepped for a show. So I did a show that summer. So technically I'm that prep coach that did one show and thinks he's a prep coach now. That's me. So yeah, I did a show in 2018 here in Georgia. And I think I dropped like 50 pounds that prep. It was like a 26, 27 week long prep. I was tiny. I was like, I'm 6'1". I think my stage weight was like 163 pounds, and I was shredded. I was peeled, but I was tiny. And so I did that show. And that's where, I got into the sport and kind of learned about bodybuilding a little bit more. I'd become friends with Jonathan Hambrick at the beginning of that prep, if you're familiar with him. And what was super interesting was he did his very first show about a month before mine. So we started our contest preps at the same time. And I remember we both started them, and I would be watching him and I'd be like, man, I'm not changing like he is. Like, what's going on here? And that's where I kind of started learning about genetics a little bit. But yeah, I competed. I did a show then. And ever since then, I've just really been trying to, pay my dues in a sense, to put size on. I do want to compete again. My own coaching and my coaching and my athletes are something that will always come before like my own athletic endeavors. And it's been a tough balance trying to find harmony in between my own bodybuilding and also coaching athletes over the last couple of years. This is going into my fourth season of coaching, and I've started to notice, how much easier it is to just manage stress and not be as overwhelmed through things. Just the more time that I've been in a more stressed place, or just have more experience working throughout a busy season with athletes, I've learned how to just separate it a little bit more, and not mentally like burn out in a sense, because when your hobby and your work are within the same field, it can become overwhelming a little bit. Um, and so it's something I'm still working on, with finding that balance. But this year has been like the best so far, where I've been able to be consistent throughout the season on show weekends and stuff like that. And I've noticed that the better that I take care of my own self, the better I can take care of my athletes too.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I'm at with things. So things are progressing well, but it's been a ride and journey.
What's kind of like your training philosophy? And then when you work with clients or athletes, Cam, do you help them just specifically on the nutrition side of things, or do you actually, if they want the help, construct like training programs and stuff as well?
Sure. When you say philosophy, what specifics do you want to get into per se?
Kind of like, there's the progressive overload. That's kind of like the philosophy that's pretty prevalent nowadays, at least I see through social media. But, are you kind of like a high volume guy? Are you the balls to the wall top set kind of guy, and then you do some back off stuff? Like what kind of like, what's your methodology in terms of training, or what do you kind of like prefer maybe, or does it kind of just depend upon yourself and the individual client and their goal?
Sure. So in terms of training philosophies, I think, and this probably holds true for most coaches, that some kind of progressive modality is, the goal, whether it be through load progression, rep progression, just from an execution standpoint, where maybe we're not going up in reps or load, but the way that we're performing the exercise is better, or possibly even progressing through volume. Over the last year and a half, I've changed up, really how I've been writing training for my athletes. I used to take an approach where we would progressively increase intensity over the course of a 4 to 5 week block. So I don't know if you ever heard of reps in reserve, but we kind of took that approach where maybe week 1 we'd be at like 3 to 4 shy from failure. Week 2 would be maybe 2 to 3, and then take it all the way to 0 in reserve, and then have a deload throughout that with a lower intensity. We were able to push volume a little bit higher, and recovery capacity was able to withhold a little bit higher of a volume ceiling. Now that over the last year and a half, I've really started to shy away from that and work towards a lower volume approach with higher intensity, and kind of putting quality over quantity when it comes to training. And I've really liked it a lot. I think one thing that I've noticed that's for certain is athletes in a contest prep and dieting down, that volume is very, very taxing, whether you're performing sets to true failure or maybe 3 to 4 set or reps shy from failure, because those are still pretty hard sets. But going into things from a physical and mental standpoint, it's exhausting, going up and seeing, you get to your next exercise and you're like, oh, wow, I've got 4 sets here. Like, this is a lot, versus, an athlete that now, we have a pretty consistent intensity marker, day to day, set to set. So I feel like mentally it's a little bit easier to get in that same just zone and just flip that switch, every time you go in, versus almost kind of like holding yourself back a little bit and then having to push yourself 1 week that's, out of 4. And mentally just knowing like, okay, like I got to go all out for like maybe 1 top set here or a top set and a back off. But more so just keeping a higher intensity and maybe 2 working sets tops, or they might have some kind of intensifier where it's a rest pause or a drop set following just 1 hard top set. That's really what I like now. And not having any kind of just program deload after 4 to 5 weeks, more so just, this is what we're doing. We're just going to ride it till the wheels fall off. Keep me posted how your fatigue is trending throughout the course of things. Maybe we'll adjust volume and pull back as needed. Um, and I'm really, really big on keeping a logbook. That's something that I've noticed. It helps just take athletes from one level to another within their own training. And I think I know it builds a high level of awareness around what athletes are doing. And, you have a logbook, it holds you accountable to going in and really making sure like, hey, like I hit this number last week. I feel like crap today. I'm going to have to go in and just kill it to try and hit this same number.
Yeah, I 1,000% agree with you, Cam, in terms of the logbook. I hear different athletes that, maybe don't think as highly with the logbook. They don't do it, and that's fine. Everybody's different, but I'm right with you, man. I just think there's something about, and for me, I'm, obviously I'm a little bit older than you, but I really like having, like a pen and a notebook, like not in your phone. Cause when I'm training, like my phone is nowhere around me. But there's just something about writing something down, and science has proven this, like even like with goals or what have you. When you put a pen to paper, there's something cognitively that happens. And I think if you really got into the psychology of having a logbook as an athlete, you would find some pretty powerful research in terms of just results, whether that's results in the gym or what have you. But no, 1,000% agree with you. I think the logbook can be a powerful tool if used properly. Now, I want to ask you. You kind of brought up the one podcast, that group of guys that kind of influenced you, but who are some other maybe athletes or coaches in those earlier years of you learning how to be a prep coach really had a profound influence on you? If you don't mind talking about that for a couple minutes.
Sure. Yeah. Let me think, because there can be a lot here. So I mentioned like 3DMJ. I loved their podcast and the stuff that they were putting out. Um, Jason Theobald, I listened to a lot of his stuff too, and him and I are acquaintances now. So it's pretty cool to start to kindle relationships with some of these people. I've got a really good buddy, Dominic Kuza. He was on that old team as well, that I became friends with him. I think we chatted for the first time, like the second show that I put somebody into, and we're super close up until now. Man, who else? There's a guy named Broderick Chavez that I learned a lot about when it comes to just PEDs, blood work. Man, the Paul Serafini that I mentioned, I moved in with initially. He helped point me in a lot of great directions. I remember Bill Campbell putting out good studies on just dieting and diet rotations, and fatigue management with dieting. There's been a ton. And then here lately, I've learned a lot from Matt Jansen. He's somebody that I very fortunately have been able to get in contact with, and we've built a little bit of a relationship, and he's helped me from time to time with mentoring. But man, I mean, I'm trying to think, because there's just so many people that I've learned from or listened to, that it's tough to even put them all, within a same call of who all. But I mean, there's been a ton of people. I think those are a big majority of them. But really all of the friends that I have and that I'm close to within the sport that are coaches, we all just kind of learn from one another. Just a big old circle, and if there's areas we can make each other better, we get into conversations, help wherever we can, and just try and make this sport the best that we can be.
Okay, I want to ask you this question, because this is something like, I train people and I own a gym. But for me, thinking about prepping somebody is kind of like taking it to a whole nother level, as it just taking somebody like through a workout, right, in the gym. Because it's just like, man, you have to kind of get more intimate. There's different levels to it, especially like if somebody's going to step on a stage, there's so many factors. And so what I want to ask you about prepping people and where you were at that one point, like when you start bringing in the PEDs, like I know for myself personally, like that's something like I've chosen not to take PEDs myself. And like, I just could never, uh, just bring myself, I guess, to the point where I would help somebody like prep and help them with their PEDs. Cause like, man, that's like a whole, like it's a whole nother level, right? It's one level to prep somebody. It's a whole nother level to kind of help somebody with PEDs, because there's just so many factors and there's so many things that potentially could go wrong. So when you were at that point when you're like, okay, I'm going to do this prep coach thing, I'm going to help people with PEDs. Like, can you talk us through about like your mindset and like kind of like how was that for you? Was that kind of scary? Was that tough for you to learn all that? I mean, obviously it's an ongoing thing in terms of continuing to learn, if you want to be great. But talk to us a little bit about that, because that's something for me. Like just thinking about it, like it makes me kind of nervous. I'm like, man, I would never want to do that. So talk about that if you don't mind.
Sure. I mean, I think as a coach that cares about their athletes, it's never not a scary thing. You know, there's never not there's always a risk that's going to come into place. And, you know, I pray to God that I get out of this sport, and by the time that I'm done, nothing drastic has ever happened to any of my athletes, because the honest truth is I'm sure there's plenty of situations where a coach didn't ever do anything necessarily wrong, and it was just the bad luck of the draw and something happens to an athlete, you know. It's always scary, especially some of like my bigger guys that I really care about, where we both know the risk comes with it. You know, there's just being that big in general, the risk is high for things to happen. And it's kind of like the only way to reduce that risk is make you smaller and come off of anything that would not be, you know, normal range for you. So it's definitely a sticky subject. And it's also one of those things where it's kind of like there's not going to be some kind of goal that you set out for yourself, especially a big one, where you're not going to have moments that you're timid and nervous in, and that the risk for something going wrong is a little bit more elevated than other situations. And it's one of those things where I know that, you know, and I don't want to come off arrogant by any means, but I know that, you know, I do a good job at what I do. And there's athletes, like whether all of the athletes that I coach, even if I wasn't coaching them, they would still be in this sport. They would be with some other coach. And, you know, there's lots of good coaches out there, and there's also way more bad coaches out there than there are good. And so it's one of those things where it's like, hey, these people are going to take these PEDs regardless. And, you know, hopefully I can do the best of my ability to manage their blood work and minimize the risks that are going to come with this. You know, I try and do a good job, especially with some of my younger athletes or those that are just earlier on, to discuss, you know, how big of a step it is that they're taking with going on to PEDs, and helping them understand that, like, hey, your thought processes from, you know, 22 years old to 30 years old are going to be totally different. You're going to have different morals and how you think about life. You know, you probably don't care about a family or having kids or this and that at 21, you know, but at 30, like, things are going to change. And it's one of those things where you can say all the things in the world that you want to, but at the end of the day, if somebody wants to do something, they're going to do it. And it's just about guiding them the best way possible and making sure that, you know, like I mentioned, with knowing other coaches and us being in a circle, like there's plenty of times where, you know, we all collaborate together, and it's like, hey, like, this doesn't look too off to you, or like, you know, can we go over this lab work together, or, you know, here's my thoughts, I want to know yours. And that's part of how I mentioned, like, just trying to make the sport the best we can, and making sure that as a whole, like, we just take care of our people. So that's one way that we go about it. And it's really just, you know, making sure that high levels of communication are kept between the coach and the athlete, and that risk to reward is something that is mutually accepted by both parties, and understanding what we're getting into, and just making sure that, you know, we're able to respect each other and each other's morals, and making the calls and decisions that we're doing. and going about it in the best way possible.
So if you have somebody that's younger that approaches you and they want to start bodybuilding, they want to start taking PEDs, let's say somebody that's 18, 19, 20 years old, kind of that range. I mean, you kind of alluded to a little bit, but like, you know, why shouldn't somebody at that age start taking PEDs? Like, I mean, do you kind of have like your guidelines of when and why somebody should start taking PEDs? I mean, I've had all kinds of different athletes on here and coaches, and they kind of all have their recommendations or, you know, what have you. But and you brought it up, and it's a great point. Like, people are going to do what they're going to do, and you'd rather have them, you know, kind of being overseen by you because you know that you're going to take care of them to the best of your ability. But I think somebody in your position, as you grow in the coaching industry and have more rapport and respect from different people, the younger generation is going to look up to you, just like people are starting to really look up to like Matt Jansen. And when Matt Jansen speaks, a lot of people listen. So from that age range, from 18 to 20, 18 to 21, like, why shouldn't somebody start taking PEDs? Like, do you kind of have some guidelines, or, you know, do you kind of like try to steer people away of why they shouldn't take PEDs or start taking them?
Sure. So I think it's one thing if, for example, someone just, especially a male, just has low testosterone and they go on some kind of TRT. But, you know, in terms of, you know, what age would I necessarily green light steroid use being okay? I don't think that I would say there's a certain age, but I would say that typically with age comes a certain maturity level. And we probably start to see that maturity level coming around maybe 21 to 23 years old, where not only are they just more mature from a mental aspect, but from an athletic standpoint as well. You're not going to find many 18-year-olds who have been consistently lifting, you know, following a nutritional profile, staying on top of health supplements, that have been doing that for 3 to 4 years and enough time where the new and fun has kind of worn off and they're burned out of it anymore. And you're just not really going to see that at an 18-year-old or 19-year-old level. And where I kind of deem a green light for someone who has never taken anything before is making sure that all these foundational principles are laid down, have been practiced, are something that they enjoy doing and have a passion surrounding, and taking time to deal and make it habit of all the tedious little annoying things that go into making a good bodybuilder. Because more often than not, they're probably not going to be some genetic specimen where it doesn't matter what they do, they're going to be great. They need to lay down these foundational habits that, like I said, they're going to have to do at some point, whether or not they want to be good. And so I think it, you know, that takes a couple of years to really nail those things. Like I told you myself, like finding balance with it all, like these are all still things I'm practicing and learning how to do too, you know? And like I said, I mean, I guess if someone already had naturally low testosterone, had maybe been lifting from the time they were 14 years old and just were living and breathing it to a point where they're like, no, I absolutely love it. Like maybe then it starts to come into discussion. But I don't know. It's such a sticky circumstance because there's just not a ton of people that you're going to find in that position where it's just like, is this really necessary? Like, do you need to do this right now? But I mean, you never know. It's tough when you talk to somebody on the phone or in the situation with them. But I would say for the most part, you know, there's not a certain age level. There's a certain maturity and athletic development level that needs to come with PD use. And like I said, just kind of making sure that new is worn off a little bit, kind of like in a relationship where it's like, you really want to be with this person for sure. Like it's easy to say now when you're the first month or two into things, but like, how about when we're like 8, 9, 10 months into it? How are you feeling now? Like, is that still something you want to pursue?
Yeah, that's great advice. I appreciate you touched on that, Cam. So another question here. sifting through all of the coaching opportunities or the coaches that are out there. You said there's a lot of good ones and there's a lot more bad ones earlier when you were chatting. So how does somebody kind of sift through and find a quote unquote good coach? And then kind of a follow-up question to that, what makes, I don't want to talk about just a good coach, but what from your perspective, and I know you're still learning, but what from your perspective makes a great coach? Who is it why Matt Jansen? Why do you think he's a great coach, or Jason Theobald? Like why do you seek out certain people to learn from them? Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, those are great questions. So in regards to just, I guess, sifting and kind of, finding a good coach, as an athlete, I think a lot of the times athletes forget that when they hire the coach is working for them, and that they need the athlete a lot more than the athlete needs the coach, because there's a lot more athletes out there than there are coaches. And, an easy way to just kind of make sure that, you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's when finding a good coach would be, reach out to them, see if you could even get on a phone call with them, see if they'll give you that time of the day before even chatting more. And, maybe talking with some of their athletes that have been working with them for a while, seeing if they have athletes who aren't just genetic freaks that they're transforming, and some real athletes that maybe didn't look like one in the first place, but now do. There's a lot of great coaches out there that aren't putting out just a ton of information. And I don't think that I'm really one of those coaches either that put out a ton of information. I don't look at myself as, a teacher per se. I look at myself more as like a producer. And, there's a lot of, and it's great that there's a ton of information out there too. But just as much as that information can show value, I think it can also hide some people from the truth in regards to what is, if they're truly a good coach or not. It's great that people are putting out knowledge, but I think one thing to also look at is, okay, what's their record looking like? Like what's the wins to losses? What's the just transformation of some of these athletes? What's the real world application looking like that they're putting down? And I think that's really important, in not getting too caught up in just big fancy words that people are using. I dropped out of college. I don't have any kind of educational background with this stuff. There's some words that I see coaches put out and I'm just like, I don't even know what this means. And if I don't, an athlete definitely isn't going to know what it means, and it's not necessary. And so I think that's really important to note as well. Finding coaches that, if you get on the phone with them, and maybe it's an athlete that has worked with a coach before, being able to, without like blasting somebody's name, being able to discuss like, okay, what are some of the setbacks that they'd had with a prior coach? What are some of the qualities and attributes that they're looking for in a coach? And I've had times where I've gotten on a call with somebody and I've just been like, hey, like, I don't think that's going to be me. Like, there's nothing wrong with me, nothing wrong with you. I just think you might be better off with so-and-so, or just, to keep looking. And yeah, I think just being able to, like I said, almost with a relationship, like sometimes you can find people you just click with, and like you can tell out the gate. And I think that sometimes happens. And I notice it too when I have consultations with potential new athletes, where we get on the phone and I'm just like, oh, this is going to be good. Like I mesh with this person already. So I think that kind of answers it. And probably too, just, giving some time of watching what that coach is doing and sitting on it without just jumping to a quick decision because they're super trendy, or, whatever the case may be. Because, when you get into working with somebody, it should be a long-term commitment. There's going to be lots of times where there's trial and errors and failures, and followed by success. And it's like, you got to find somebody you can sit through the tough times with. And so I think that's really important. I think some of those things might help with just sifting through and finding a good coach. And then what do I think makes a great coach? Oh man, this one's gonna be tough to answer. Like I said, somebody that, I think there's different definitions of a great coach, actually. I think there's different athletes and different people out there who would define great coaches differently. And it's tough to specifically answer what a great coach is. I think in general, between all the different, I guess, types of great coaches, one thing that they would all have in common is they raise those up that are around them, or that are being asked to have support from them. I think that they bring out the best in people, whether that be someone hires them that thinks they want to be a bodybuilder, and throughout that process they learn like, hey, like this really isn't just for me, but now I have peace and happiness with just being in the gym and being healthy, and I'm just finding myself as a person. Or whether it's somebody that wants to be a bodybuilder and they take them and transform them into just like a world-class athlete. But I think it's somebody that is relatable to the athlete, someone who cares about them. It's tough because I find myself in certain situations with some past athletes where I'm like, do I care more than you do? And, I think great coaches are people that are going to lose sleep at night worrying about if they're taking care of their people enough or not. There's plenty of times where I've been like, man, like, am I doing all the things I need to be doing? And, I'll sometimes have a couple of my friends that I'm more close with that I coach, and I'll bring up those thoughts to them, and they're like, are you serious? Like, dude, you're good. Relax. Um, you know, I- and yeah, I think it's just a coach that knows how to take all of their same principles and philosophies and apply them differently, but apply the same philosophies differently across the board, and realizing that everybody is different, and they learn how to mold themselves and adapt to the athlete rather than an athlete maybe going all in and adapting to them. There's some kind of just middle ground that's met between the two, where they just like lock and key, figure out how to do it together. And I think that's really what defines a great coach, is somebody who's able to just be a leader and really bring out the best in somebody.
Excellent, man. Yeah, love those points. All right. We've been going for close to an hour, so we're going to start wrapping things up. I want to take a step kind of back into your story for a minute here, Cam. You kind of brought us up to the point where it's like you started putting people on stage. You had somebody win an overall right away, somebody turned pro right away. Will you kind of just wrap up and finish up kind of, to the point where we're at today in 2020? So, you started, producing right away, getting results right away. And then how has your coaching and clientele, how is that evolution kind of evolved up to this point? And like, then where do you kind of want to take this coaching thing in the long term?
Sure. So, and I'm like I said, I'm not somebody that likes like toot my own horn or anything like that, but I've been very, very fortunate with the athletes that I've been able to work with, whether it be from a genetic standpoint or just their trust and discipline level that they have. So ever since starting out, yeah, things have been just climbing from the start. It was a really great year, that first year of coaching. We got a couple pro cards, some overall wins. I will say I'm very picky with who I do put on stage, because I like to bring out the best in people. And there's some people that might think like, oh, like he's too picky, I'll never meet their standards. Like, and it's like, no, your standards are just higher than you're believing they are. And so I've been pretty picky with who I put on stage. I don't regret it a single bit. But things have gone well. That second year, it was the same thing. Did I have, what was the second year? 2020. That was the first year I had a pro show with somebody, and it was Jarrett Crew. We did the Chicago Pro that fall. It was his pro debut and the first time I put a pro on stage, and he got second place and almost went to the Olympia there. So that was a really big deal. There was another pro show later that year where Jarek and another guy named JT both did it, and they were both in the top 5. The following year, Jarrett got invited to the Arnold Classic, and that was a pretty big deal to go and attend. and still collecting some pro cards and taking some overall wins throughout most of these years. Most everybody has hung out within the first call out or either won their class. This year, my biggest goal, like going into this past season, the biggest goal that I had is one, I wanted to get a bikini pro card. I'm not a huge bikini coach, but it's something I'm like, okay, I can coach this division. I need to knock it off for myself. I wanted to accomplish that. Last year, I had 3 people that took runner up in the overall at a national show. So I wanted to get an overall win at the national level. And then I've had a couple times where I've had a couple guys fall short at winning a pro show. And so I really wanted to get an Olympia qualification. And those were like my 3 big goals for this year. Fortunately, I had a girl compete at junior nationals about 2 weeks ago. She ended up winning the bikini overall and pro card. So that kind of knocked out 2 and 1 there. I've got JT competing in a couple shows in a couple weeks, and I'm really, really excited for him. It'll be the best he's ever been, and we're just going to continue focusing on being at his best, and hopefully the judges like that day. So we'll see if we can get an Olympia qualification there. I've got Trey going on stage at USA's, and he's like my first big boy that I've put on stage at a national level. So I'm really, really excited for him. So yeah, man, it's going to be a fun, exciting year. Things are going to get really busy and picked up July through the rest of the year. But yeah, there's a lot of great athletes that are going to be getting on stage. I've got some that have been working with me for 2-3 years that we've just been building this whole time, and they've stuck it out, been patient, finally getting them on stage. I've got some new faces that are going to be getting on stage as well that I can just tell they're already going to be around for the long run anyway. So I'm excited for us to kind of make our introduction together and kind of build our first little memories and experiences together. At shows, I feel like I always get, it's a big just step that we take together, and just like our relationship as coach and athlete, and build a lot of trust there. So I'm really excited to just kind of connect on that level with some of them. So yeah, man, I'm excited. The biggest goal just year to year is just keep finding little things to get better at, and just letting everything trend over time in a positive upward direction.
Now, what do you, outside of kind of just like, getting those results for your clients and becoming better as a coach each year, do you kind of have like a long-term vision in terms of like, we kind of see going back to like Matt Jansen, he's still coaching, but he's really used coaching to, open up other avenues for himself in terms of revenue streams and things like that with the supplement companies. I'm sure that there's going to be more, but what's your long-term vision in terms of like professionally and career-wise? Do you want to exit coaching at some point, get into supplements, completely get out of the fitness industry? Do you have any thoughts, or are you kind of just focused right now where you're at presently?
Yeah, so I've had thoughts. I feel like it's something that I won't know until an opportunity arises. And what I do know is that I have right now just to keep getting better. I know that there's way more out there that are still better than me, and I want to get to that level and elevate past them. But I know that my athletes can keep getting better. I know that I can keep getting better. And so that's my biggest focus right now. Eventually, I would love to get to a point, like I said, and I mentioned, back when I was talking about, what I wanted to do in high school, I always want to get to a point where I can take care of a family. And when you're coaching 100+ people, you don't really have a ton of life outside of that, and so I would love to get to a point where I do have some kind of business infrastructure in place where, there's some kind of income coming in that's not just one-on-one coaching. So maybe I can scale back a good bit and just be really, really focused on, 30 to 40 athletes rather than more like where things are at now. And then also just have more time to be a husband, a father, build a family, and just, be there for, my son and future sons, and hopefully a girl one day later on down the road. So it's one of those things where we're just kind of taking it as it comes, and I'm sure it'll all come together. It always seems to find a way to. um,
Yeah, for sure.
but very very thankful for the current position I'm in, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And if I did end up just doing this forever, what I'm doing now, I would be more than happy with it. I've got some really great athletes and just people that I'm surrounded by, and super grateful for that.
100%, man. I want to go back to Trey just for a second. For those of you who are watching or listening to this episode with Cam, Trey Adcock, I think is maybe 2 or 3 episodes back. But dude, I'm super excited. I was his I think it's his girlfriend, his significant other, like had reposted his episode on Instagram, and I just sent her a DM saying, "Hey, thank you," which I try to do that to everybody because I'm very appreciative of everybody that shares episodes. And I just said, "Hey, I'm really excited, to see what Trey's going to do. I'm pretty sure he's going to turn pro this year." And she's like, "You and me both." But man, like had a great conversation with him, and I'm so excited because it's like, dude, he gets it. Like he's like had like 3 years off since he last competed. And I'm like, "Well, why have you taken 3 years off?" He's like, "Man," he's like, I just got to get bigger. I got to get better." I'm like, and that's the mindset that you're seeing kind of like with Hunter Labrada, right? You're seeing that with Brett Wilkin, some of these guys that are like, "Oh wow, like where'd they come from?" Well, they understand it's a process and it takes time, especially when you're a bigger athlete. So just touch on that, and let's tie that into maybe just from your perspective as a coach with some people that are watching or listening. It's like bodybuilding does take time. Bodybuilding is a process. Trey has taken off 3 years since he last competed. He's going to step on a USA stage. I think he's going to turn pro this year, but like, that's really hard in the instant gratification world that we're living in. So talk about Trey, and then maybe just share from your perspective as a coach, how important it is to take that time off and to allow your body to grow, to lay that foundation that you referred to earlier so that you can be the best athlete that you can be. Is that cool just to touch on that for a minute?
Yeah. No, absolutely. You've got me as long as you want me. So,
Okay.
Trey is one of those guys where I'm very, very grateful to be his coach. He's somebody that he just allows me to be a coach at my fullest abilities, and really just, I know with Trey, he's going to be patient. He's going to, listen to anything I say. I know that if I mess up, we'll be able to be accountable for it. He's not going to go running off to anybody else. I can go into things without hesitations, and just, I don't know. He's somebody that, like I said, you can be the fullest level of a coach with him, because there's nothing he won't do that if it means it's going to make him the best he can be. And, I remember when he first hired me, he was like, "Hey, I don't want to get on stage until I can turn pro." And so I was just like, "Oh man, all right, well, we're setting the standard pretty high here, Trey. You just got like 12th as a heavyweight, and he's gonna be a super this year." So it's been something with him where one of my big philosophies, and what I say all the time, is quality shit takes time. And I always feel like you can't put a timeline on success. And there's a lot of athletes that they create this pressure and this internal pressure that doesn't exist, because they think everyone cares about them and what they're doing and what show they're doing. And as brutal as it is, like, no one really cares. The only people that care are the ones that are close to you and the ones that hate you. And like that's the truth. And I just, let's say I pick up a new athlete and I start with them, and they need to grow. And one of the questions sometimes a lot of people ask is just like, "Okay, like, well, what do you think in terms of timeline of hitting the stage?" I'm just like, "I don't know. Like, I've never worked with you before. There's going to be life stuff that pops up that we don't have control over. Like, we know we have to accomplish X, and we've got to make all these progressions from here to here. And who knows how long it's going to take." But, especially those athletes where I'm just like, we're going to take it 6 months at a time. We've got this mini goal that we're working on right here that's going to be part of allowing us to have an opportunity to accomplish this long-term goal. And we're just breaking everything up into all these little mini steps that are going to take us from A to Z. And it's just like, hey, like we're gonna do things as optimal and as efficient as possible. And when you're ready, you're ready. But for now, like we have this small mini goal we got to focus on, and that's what we got to check off. And you know, I've had athletes that have left because again, I hold a really high standard, and some people aren't going to like that. Some people are going to feel like they're never going to achieve it or get to that standard, and that's okay. I'm still going to hold them to that level because that's what they came here for, you know. And if I believe in them more than they do, it's that's unfortunate.
So, okay, we're gonna wrap it up here. You just brought up the fact that people leave you as a coach, and this is something that kind of like personally bugs me because again, like I just train people in a gym, okay, just a trainer. Like I'm not an online coach or anything, but man, like, and I'm in Iowa. I'm in a very small town, less than 5,000 people. Fitness is not a thing here, okay. But the gym that I own's been here for 30 plus years, and I compete, so people kind of know a little bit about myself. It's my hometown, all those things, right? But it just me. This is me being very transparent and real right now with you and everybody that's listening to this. Like, it really bugs me, like when somebody walks into the office at the gym and they sit down, we have like a face-to-face consultation. They're like, I want to lose weight, I want to do this, and I'm going to train with you. And then it's like a short amount of time, like they're gone, you know. And honestly, I'm kind of gotten to the point where I try to defer people from training with me because I just know 99.9% of the time with the situation I'm in, it's not going to last that long. And like it kind of hurts me inside, man, when people leave. Just like when you have a significant other and they like, hey, like I'm leaving you, like it sucks, right?
Yeah.
So from my perspective, that kind of hurts, right? And I always remind myself, I'm like, Quentin, like people leave Matt Jansen, people leave, this person or that person. These are the top level coaches that legitimately get people results, and they have clients leave them. That's just the nature of the beast. I try to reassure myself with that, but it still kind of hurts. Have you just kind of become numb to that, or does that still kind of bug you a little bit when people like commit, they pay you the money, and then after a short time, they're like, hey, like I'm out? Talk about that, because I don't hear a lot of coaches talking about that, because we're losing money when that happens, and it kind of hurts and it sucks, I think, for most of us that truly care about people.
Sure. I mean, yeah, it definitely hurts. And the level of hurt depends on how much you've really, I guess, been selfless in a way, because as a coach and a coach that really cares, it's easy to put all your athletes before your own self. Like there's been times where I've just completely almost neglected myself within like self-care just because I just want to make sure my people are taken care of before me. And, when you really invest and pour a lot of time into some of these humans and they leave, it almost just feels like, man, you're just here to get something out of me. Like, as a coach that puts them first, you care a ton about them. And you get in situations like this where it's like, damn, you don't care about me. You just care about yourself. And there's nothing wrong with that by any means. But when you hire a coach, you need to go into things and understand that as easy it is to trust them and execute and follow the plan when it's something that you want to do, you have to go about things that same way when it's stuff that you don't want to do, because you're hiring a coach because there's some gap in intellect that you don't have that they do. And when it comes time and rubber meets the road and we're hitting that point of a decision being made, and you have that gap there within your own intelligence of why that decision's being made, either they can explain it to you and you understand, or don't understand, you still need to trust them. And when going in and hiring a coach, you need to be able to sit and think about, okay, if they want me to do something that I don't want to do, that's not like harmful per se or putting them in a dangerous situation, it's like, am I going to be able to listen to this person and trust them and have a blind eye to it? And if you can't do that, you either don't need to be working with a coach, or you need to find somebody that you can trust in a situation like that. And yeah, man, it's tough when people leave. Like, it happens. And it's something that I've noticed can also like kind of build a little bit of a shell around you as a coach. And you your heart grows a little bit colder. You get a little bit more reserved to kind of pouring out into people. And it's something that I think as coaches, it might be hard to get past and struggle with, and almost still be able to fully trust people and not have those kind of trust issues where it's like, damn, is this person just going to leave me? Like, can I fully pour everything into you and not worry about you leaving? And yeah, I think it's something that it happens. It's always going to happen. People are going to put, short-term wants over long-term needs. And yeah, it's tough. It's part of it though.
Yeah, I know. I try to reassure myself that it is part of it, but it just sucks, man, because yeah, it's part of the business. Not a lot you can do about it, I guess. But all right, let's last question for my end. Cam, now, I know you haven't competed a lot, but however you want to take this, what do you feel like bodybuilding or coaching? You can kind of combine the two if you like. What do you feel like bodybuilding and coaching has taught you? Or what do you feel like bodybuilding and coaching has given you?
I mean, coaching has given me a life, to be honest. Without it, I definitely have no clue where I would be. It's given me people, friends, relationships, just it's given me my life and my whole like world and what it surrounds me in. I'm so immersed into it that I don't know what's going on with politics. I don't know what's going on with anything really else in the world. Like, this is kind of the world that I live in, and I love it. The closest people in my lives are the ones that usually are associated within bodybuilding. So that's what that's given me. What bodybuilding has given me is it's allowed me to continue to be an athlete. I'm never going to be somebody that's going to be on the Olympia stage. Who knows if I'll even ever get a pro card, but it allows me to kind of go into my own little bubble that's not work and not being a coach, and kind of just tune things out for a little bit. And it gives me something that I can still do and say, like, I'm still caring and taking care of myself and putting some time towards my own self. I think if I didn't do that, I don't really have a ton of other hobbies. I wouldn't like be sitting around playing video games, or like definitely wouldn't like go running or anything like that. So it gives me something where I can still say like, hey, I'm still caring about me over here. And what bodybuilding has given coaching is I love being an athlete. So that's part of the reason why I am pursuing bodybuilding still. But what I've learned from being a bodybuilder, what I've learned being a coach, I don't even know how to word that, but what I've learned from bodybuilding that's translated into coaching has been, it's something that you couldn't learn out of a book. It's being in the trenches, learning, from a mental aspect where I'm at with things. Like I said, I got peeled for my first show. So I know what it's like to go to that place. I know what it's like to prep during times that really, really suck, and just mentally stay strong through that. And, like I mentioned, kind of staying patient through growing. Like I've been in an off season for like 4 years now, just trying to put on size. So just trying to practice what I preach there. It's been great. It's been a blessing. It's something that, if I would have told my own younger self at like 13, this is what I would be doing, I'd be like, that's hilarious. Like, no, you're not. But yeah, man, it's been super, super cool. I'm very, very fortunate.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Your story's cool. You're so young. God willing, you've got a lot of life ahead, and hopefully, maybe in a year or something, we can bring you back on, and you're gonna have people on the Olympia stage, and you've been on the stage by that point. But we're gonna wrap it up here, Cam. Before I do the outro, I just kind of want to give you the opportunity to share any final thoughts, any final words that you have. Any shout outs, any sponsors, anything of that nature. The floor is yours, my man. And then I'll do the outro, and that'll be a wrap.
Sure, man. I mean, first off, just thank you for having me on here. Thank you to any guests that watch this for supporting what you put out. I always think it's super cool whenever, there's different accounts out there that just help build up this sport and continue to support bodybuilding and support athletes and just getting their names out there and giving some spotlight. A shout out to anybody I kind of was mentioning within this video. If you listen to this and you're one of those people that I've learned from, I really greatly appreciate you. In terms of sponsors, Raw Nutrition and Revive, they've been somebody that have really always helped back my athletes and their health. And then yeah, I think that's it, man.
Very, very, very cool, dude. And yeah, Raw and Revive, I've had a lot of their different products. I'm taking some of the Revive stuff right now. So definitely legit supplements. And obviously the guys that are behind those companies are legit. So Cam, thank you so much, man. Look forward to seeing what you're going to do with Trey at the end of July at the USA's, man. And then I'll definitely love to have you on maybe at the end of the year or sometime next year. And we'll talk just some more shop and pick your brain and see where everything's at that point. Does that sound good?
Yeah, whenever you need me, man.
Cool. All right, man. All right, all of you who are tuning into another episode of Behind the Muscle Podcast, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate all of you. If it wasn't for you guys, you gals that subscribe and tune in, listen, watch Behind the Muscle Podcast, the reality is the podcast wouldn't exist. So I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode with Coach Cam. A couple of quick things before we wrap up this conversation with Cam. If you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Very important because I release all of these episodes first on YouTube, and then I'll distribute them to iTunes and the other major podcast platforms that you can find Behind the Muscle Podcast. So please hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Greatly appreciate that. And then also take this episode with Cam, share it on your Instagram stories. Make sure you tag Cam, tag Behind the Muscle so that we know you specifically listened to this episode and found great value in it, in which I know you did. If you are trying to find Cam on Instagram, I will have his Instagram and Behind the Muscle Podcast Instagram down in the show notes. Whether you're on YouTube, iTunes, you can scroll down to the show notes. You can find Cam's Instagram, find Behind the Muscles Instagram. Make sure you go to Instagram, follow us. We greatly appreciate that. And then finally, I will leave you all with this. Remember, behind the muscle, there's always a story. We'll catch you guys later.